Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining. So let's begin with the recap. So whatever topic we covered last day. So if you remember last day we remained to cover the topic that is while loop. So yes, in the session we will start from the while loop only. But as recapping of the last session that the day 5, we cover integration versions when we learn that what kind of versions are available for the Oracle integrations like measure, manner and patch. Then we move to the coding of that integration. What was differences between both? We check that logger. So what is logger and differences between logger and note. We move to the notification, then we learn switch, and we created integration where we implemented the scope concept. So now in this session today we will first start with the while loop. Then after we will move to the next topic that is for each loop. So how we can iterate the repeating element over there. Then we will use data string to create global variables to assign value to the global variables. Then we have wait. So we will check for weight, and then we will use a stage file activity to create files, read a file of the specific data for the file, and that kind of operation we will perform. So let's move to the integration and we'll check. So first let me create integration where we will use the loop. So while loop we are mostly using for iterating the repeated process. So sometimes we require repeat the process again and again on a specific time or on a specific times of loop. So at the time we will use while loop. For example, we are going to invoke the SOAP services to call the BI report, the real scenarios, what we are using. So whenever we are creating integration to get the data from BI report and placing the data over any ATP table or placing the data while creating the file over email or placing the server. So for that, sometimes we require to add retry logic in integration so that whenever we call BI report, if there is some server issue and we are not able to get the data, so it will again move to the calling part and again it will try to call the BI report from SOAP. So that kind of logic, whenever we required, we are going to implement the while loop. So in this session, we will create a simple integration where we will pass some values and based on some values, we will display the log on that specific loop. So let me create one integration. So I will create abdomen integration so that I can configure the request payload and the response payload. So, just click on create. So as we have to add the REST endpoint so that we can configure the request and the response payload. So I will drag this REST here, and here we have to provide the name. So I will give the name as a start REST. Next, here we will provide the name as loop, while loop, and here I will select method as post so that I can configure request and response payload both. Moving next, we have to provide the request payload. So in the request payload, I will just ask a single number so that based on that number, we will iterate the loop over time. So I will take number as parameters, and here user will provide any values. For example, 10, 12, anything. For example, we are going to create integration where user will provide the number and we will return back the addition of that number starting from 1. For example, user will pass 5, so we will return back value as 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. Whatever will be there, we will return. For that, we required while loop, so we will use that one. So here, even you can add different logics based on the requirement. Later on, yes, we will learn when we will call the BI report. We will learn the loop, how we can use loop to iterate the integration flow on a specific flow so that we can stop the loop on a specific time based on the status and all. So in the response, again, we are going to return result. Okay, next. So here we added simple REST endpoint to configure the request and the response payload. Now we have to add the loop. So here we have to, if you will see, we have to add the loop on a specific time. So suppose we have user given number as 1 and we have to iterate the loop from 1 to user has suppose user given number as 5 and we have to iterate a loop from 1 to 5 for storing the value that value 1 2 3 4 for 1 to 5 we require one variable where we can first store the values as 1 to 3 so that later on we can identify the condition. For that, let me add one variable. For adding the variable, I need to use a sign. So here I will use default assign. I will give the name, and here we'll create variable I, var underscore I. If you are aware about the program, we mostly using I variable I and j while iterating the loop in programming. So here we will start the loop from 1, validate and close. So every time when we iterate the loop, we will increase the value of that loop. So here I will add the while loop here. So here you can see we have the while option. Once you will drag here, it will iterate the loop. So here we have to give the name. So suppose I will give while only. Okay. So here we have to provide the condition when that while loop will terminate and the close. So I want to terminate that while loop only when our number, the variable we created, is greater than or equals to the number which we will receive from the request payload. So for example, right now in a starting we have variable as 1. So 1 is less than, suppose user given number as 5. So 1 is less than 5. The first time it will be true, loop will iterate. Again it will come to the control here, and here inside the loop only we will increase the value of I to 2. So again it will check 2 is less than equals to 5. That's true. So same as when it will move 6, it will check that 6 is less greater than I sorry less than. Here we will select 6 is less than equals to 5. So at the time the loop condition will be false. So we will add that kind of logic here, and here you can see whenever we are adding the while loop, it's giving us the scope. So whatever element we will provide inside this scope, that element will be repeating. The control for the integration that will be repeated inside this while loop until that condition will be false. So every time inside the loop only we will update the value of that variable. Update, assign, and what kind of variable we want to update? We want to update the value of loop variable. So we created var I, right? So here we will use var I equals to var I plus 1. So now we done the logic. Now what kind of operation we have to perform? So suppose we want to store the sum of each and every number, right? So for storing the sum of each and every number, we require one variable. So again we will move here, and here we will create one variable before starting the loop. So I will start var sum, and in starting it will be 0. So validate and close. So here again each and every time when the loop will iterate, we will take the value of I and we will store that value of I in result. So every time. So again we will move assign here, and here we will add some assign, create, and here we will provide the values var underscore. So yes, instead of providing new value, we will select our previous value, that is var sum. And what kind of value we are going to store inside that? We are going to store the value, whatever value we have in the var sum plus the loop variable, so that each and every time that will have 1, 2, 3 and so on. So we'll validate here, close, validate and close. So now we are done with the logic. So here we have one error. So that error will be resolved by adding the business identifier or the tracking identifier. So I will select the number as a tracking identifier here, save, and now error is resolved. So here you can see right now we have not mapped the response of the integration. So in the response of integration, we want to map the result variable. So here again we will edit here in the response wrapper. In the response wrapper, what we want to do? We want to add the var sum. So I will drag this var sum here, validate and close. Save. We are done with integration. Close, and now we have to activate the integration. Now we have to click on test. So in body you can see we pass 10. So it will return back the sum of all first 10 numbers. So once we will click on the test, You can see in response we got 1. Let me check somewhere we have done mistake, right? So how we will identify? You can see the loop iterated only one time. That's why we have value as 1 only. So why loop iterated one time? We need to debug. So here you can see once we will check the value, the last we updated as it's it is 2, right? Where I assign with 2, and then it should not be where I is less than. Okay, there we have 3. So let me check the question again. So here we have condition is 2 is less than equals to the number. It's true. Why it's got false? Where I
Need to decrease the main value, right?
yeah, we have decreased that's why the value of where I is changed to 2.
Okay.
Here you can see we have done the changes, right? Where I is equals to where I plus 1. So here it should again iterate second time. Reason is true that where I is less than equals to number. So 2 is less than equals to 10. That's true. Okay, let me make it a number. Try with this. In the log even we are getting the values. So here if you will see we are not able to we are not able to get the option to enable the tracing because I enable the tracing is globally. So in integration there is setup to enable the global tracing. So I have enabled yesterday the global tracing. That's why it's not showing. I will show you sometime. Let me run the integration body. We are passing some values as 3. Next. So here you can see when we pass the values 3, it return back the result of 1 plus 2 plus 3. So you can see 1 plus 2 plus 3 is equals to 6. The result we got 6. And how much time loop iterate? So you can see as we pass numeric values as 3, the loop iterated 3 times. You can see. So here you can see each and every time when loop iterated, all the elements whatever we added inside the loop that will iterate again and again. So here you can see in the loop we added 2 elements. The first sum assigned for adding storing the sum values, a second assigned for updating the value of that the loop variable. So that's why you can see we have 3 iterations. So instead of 3 if we pass 7, the loop will iterate 7 times. You can see loop iterates 7 times and it gives us result as 28. So why it's showing 28? 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7. The addition of all this number is 28. So that's the basic way that we can implement the while loop. We can add different logic for adding the while loop. Even most of the time we are using while loop to add the condition to check the status. For example, we call the ESS job and that ESS job taking much time and we have requirement we have to process the next only once the ESS job completed. So in this case what we are going to do is that the first endpoint we are calling the ESS job, then after we are adding the while loop and we are iterating the while loop until that we are not going to get the status of that ESS job as successful or completed or even completed in error. So that kind of logic we can implement using while loop. Now after that we have to go for data stitch. So we like right now we all learned that how we can create integration where we can use different variables. But sometimes we require variables to store numeric values, or sometimes we require variables to store the data, different structure of data. So that can be the response payload coming from somewhere, or sometimes we required to create variables so that that variable we can use in the global fault handler. So at that time we required that variables, and yes, we are going to create global variable in that case. Let me show you how we can create the global variable. So here again we are going to create one integration. Can you please unmute like someone if there is mute themselves? Yeah. So here I'm going to create xx variable. So now here you can see what we have to do. We have to create one global variable. For creating the global variable, let's see so how we can create. So let me first add the request and the response payload here. So we'll add a REST endpoint dot REST. So here. So right now I don't want to configure any request and response payload. Done. So we added the endpoint. So here if you will see, for adding the variables or adding the operation, and then we generally creating the local variable, that is the with the help of assign. So whenever we are creating variable with assign, we have only one option, the data type as a string, right? And yes, when we are creating the global variables, that global variables having different kinds of data type. So let me show you all the data types we have for the global variable. For example, let me add the addition operation only. So here let me take two values as a request payload. Here I will add the for one. And the result we will return back the status. So now we added the request and response payload. So here you can see we don't have mapper. So again we don't have mapper because of that we updated the endpoint, and later on we added the response payload. For adding the endpoint, again we have to drag the mapper here. So I will drag the mapper, and that mapper automatically added with the start rest endpoint. You can see. So right now I don't want to do any mapping here. I will close. Now two values we are getting from the request payload, and suppose we want to create one global variable so that we can store that values, right? So how we can store that variables or create the global variables? For creating the global variables, you have to click on this X icon. So once you will click here, you will get option to create the global variable. For creating the global variable, so you need to click here in the add variables. So here we have to provide the name of two variables. So what kind of name we can provide? We can provide any name. So for example, we have to, as we are going to create global variable. So for simple variable, we are using var. For global variable, we will use gvar so that we can easily identify that variable is global variable. And here gvar, let me add the values as num1. Here you can see whenever we are adding global variable, we are getting the data type. Once you will click on the type, we have different kinds of data type here. So what kind of data type? The first data type is a string. Second is the boolean. Even if we want to store the true and false kind of values for adding the break logic, or just for the identification purpose, or storing the status of somewhere in the logic in integration, we can use boolean. Yes, we have date type variable. Sometimes we require date type variable so that we can pass the date type format data to calling the BI report, or passing the as a request payload, or calling the any third party system. While calling the third party system, we have to pass data type as a date. So that kind of things we can select here. Same we have date and time. Date can only contain the date, but date and time will store the minute, hour, second also. And here in last we have number, and before that we have object. So number, suppose we are going to create a numeric variable, we will select only number that time. But sometimes we need to store the store the response of any endpoint, and response of that endpoint can be any type. That can be the simple response, that can be the arrays type response. At that time we will use the object. So I will show you later on, once we will create the integration, larger integration, we will see how we can use the object type. So here once we are selecting the number, we are generally getting the number type. But when we will select the object type, here you can see once we selected the object type, it's open the filter here right side, and here you can see it's asking the option to select the endpoint. So for example, what can be the object type? So once suppose here we have a start arrays, inside that execute we have the request and response payload. So once you will expand the request and response payload, in the request wrapper we have two types, two variables. So here you can see once we select this request wrapper, you can see that variable genome1 created with these two values. It means that the genome variable having the two element, that is number 1 and number 2, so that later on whenever we want to use that value, we can use the gvar number to access these two elements, or to update the value for these two, so that later on we can map directly. So that kind of things we can implement there. So right now we are not going to use this one, we will use it later. So normally here you can see once you assign the data type to variable, you cannot change. That's why we need to delete the variable, and again we need to create the global variable. So that is
Bro,
the first. Yeah.
how one global variable will store, I mean, points to one or more elements?
No,
We
the
have
global.
number one, number two, right?
Yeah, so that is one element. If you will see, we selected here as an object type. So you can see the request wrapper is the single object, right? Inside this request
Uh-huh.
wrapper, we have two elements. So we cannot say
Uh,
that the global variable is going to store two values, two creating with two elements. No, global variable we assign as an object type, so that it can directly map with the main wrapper, main
okay,
target, main
parent
node.
element,
Yeah,
request
parent
variable. Okay.
parallel element, so that whatever child element inside we have the parent, that will be mapped with the global variable only. We cannot map something like that. This global variable 0 cannot be mapped with two endpoint, two node. It cannot be mapped. Yeah. So let me create two variable g var num1. I will select the type as number, and g var num2 for one num2, and here again we will select number type as number. And here for creating the variable and submitting, we don't have option to save and close or validate. So just you have to click on this cancel button. Once you will click on the cancel button, two variable will be created. Once you will click here, you will be able to see these two variable. So now we have to use the variable. We have to assign the values to that variable. So we have already learned that whenever we want to update the value to the variable, we have to use data. We have to use assign. So once you will direct the assign, if you will see, we added the assign here. And once you will move to the creating the part, you will not be able to find the global variable created. Here you can see we don't have global variable. Why? Because of that, global variable can be accessible or can be updated with the help of data stitch only. That's why whenever we are saying that global variable, we are using data stitch for that. So here you can see we have data stitch. So assign activity is going to use to create local variable and assign the values to a specific variable which is created by assign. But the variable which is created globally, that global variable cannot be used assign to assign the variable. That's why we have data stitch. So I will drag this data stitch here, and here I will give the name to this endpoint. And here you will click on configure. Once you will click on config, you will get options. So here you have to select the variable. So what kind of variable you want to assign the value. For that, here if you will see, once you will expand here or you will click here, you can see the global variable here. With the help of data stitch, we can update the normal variable, that the local variable created by stitch, created by the assign. But we can, with the help of that global variable, we can use both. We can use global variable, we can use variable created by assign. So here we have these two variables, that gvar num1, gvar num2. So I will use gvar num1. And here you can see we have different operations. So what operations we have, if you will see, The operation we have, once you will click here, you can see we have three operations. The first operation is assign, that is the simple equals to operator, that defining that we have to provide the value to this variable. So we will use assign. And here we have append. So whenever, most of the time, whenever we are creating the object type variable, we are using append operation. We can use append operation. So that suppose in the object type variable we already added some values, and next time we want to add another values to that endpoint, for the repeating element we can use append option. And here last we have remove, so that they that can remove the value from the global variable whatever we have. So right now we will use assign activity, just later on we will use append also, so that whenever we will learn for the object type global variable we will use append. So now here what kind of value we want to assign? We want to assign g_var_num with the request payload we are getting from the starting of the integration. So from where we will get the request payload? Here you can see we are not able to see that two values. That two values are inside the start rest execute. So how we will get to know? Here once you will click on the developer view, once you will click here, you can see all these things. So here once we will expand the metadata, inside that metadata, not meta, here you can see a start rest. Inside that start rest, here we have request wrapper, and inside the request wrapper we have these two variable num1 and num2. So I will drag this num1 here. So our g_var num1 is aligned with this number 1. Again we will do the same for second variable. So again we will select variable here g_var num2, and here we will drag number 2 here, and done. So here you can see why we are getting error. So now here you can see we are getting one warning. So why we are getting one warning? If you will see, the data type we created for g_var num1 is number type, but the value we are passing, that number 1 is a string type. So why it's a string type? As a request payload we configure the number as in double quotes. So double quote define that the string value. For removing this warning, we have to convert this number 1 into number values. That's why we have number function. This number function you can directly access through these functions only. Once we will search here number, you can see we have number function, and where we have number function, under the conversion. So we will drag this number function, and what kind of values we need to convert to the number. So we have to convert the metadata, we have to convert the request payload values, the num1 into the strings number. So here I will drag here. So you can see whatever value we will have, that will be converted into number format only. So now again we have to do the same for these two. You can see once we added, warning is removed. So again we will cover here. So once you will click here, it will show you the node. I will just remove this one, and here I will drag the number 2. So now everything is fine. Just I will click on close here, so that it will be removed. So now we are successfully added the global variable to assign the to assign the values to the variable with the help of data stitch. Now here you can see I told you that we are using global variable first to define different types of data type, to create the variable types of object. And here you can see in the global fault, if you remember, in the global fault we are not able to access the general variable we are creating using the assign activity. So the variable we are creating using assign activity, suppose we created here, let me give the name as sum assign, and here we are creating variable per result, and that variable initially we are starting null values. So null value we are directly providing double single quotes, so that it's noted as we don't have values here, and close. So here you can see we created variable var result. We have two global variables, g_var num1, g_var num2, and sometimes suppose we got exception somewhere and our control moved to the global part. And here suppose if we want to access that two variable, we will not be able to get access or get that variables here. So here if you will see, let me use assign activity, and in the assign activity, suppose if I want to use the variable result variable we created, we will not able to find the result variable here. Oh, we got the result variable here. What? Let me check. So maybe in latest update they provided, but yeah, generally the local variable we created, we are not going to, we are not able to use that global local variable in the global fault. That's why most of the time we are creating global variable. So here, if you will see, let me add one mapper here. Mapper is not allowed here. So here, suppose only data stitch. And here you can see we are able to see the global variable num11 and num2. I don't know. I will check and I will update you about that one. That most of the time we are creating the variable with the help of that assign. We are not able to get that variable in the global fault. But right now here we are able to see. So I need to check that how is it possible. So here. So most of the time, whenever we require such kind of values, that values we need to access in the global fault, at the time also we are using the global variable. So that's the third features of the global variable we are using. So let me delete the global fault here. Right now we are not going to implement the global fault. So now here we are successfully able to create the variable result variable. We added two global variable. In the two global variable, whatever data we receive from the request payload, we map the data, and now we have to assign the result of addition of these two number to the variable. So here we created the result variable. Again, inside the result only we will add the addition of the two numbers. So here I will create the gender variable only. So result assign, click on create, and here I will select the result variable. In the result variable, I want to add the value of var num1 and num2. So here you can see we have the global variable num11. I will drag here and I will use addition operation, and num2 I will drag here. So the two variable we added here. Validate and close. Save. So we have one error here because of the tracing variable. So before that, let me add the tracing variable here. So yes, we'll use tracing variable here as a num1 only. Save and close. We got the error resolved. Now we have to provide the mapping to integration so that it can return back the response. So here in the response, I will just hard code the status as success. And here in the result, I will map the result variable. Validate and closed. Save. So here you can see we added the global simple variable where we created one variable as result. We added the global variable here, and in the global variable, with the help of data stitch, we assign the values, whatever values we are getting from the request payload, and we added another assign to store the addition of the two number, and we provide the same in the mapping. So let me close the save and close the integration so that I can activate and run. Activate. In the body, we are passing this two number value only, and we are getting the result success. So this is a simple way we added the global variable where we use data stitch to update the value of global variable. Yes, we will learn about the object type global variable also. Before that, let me continue with the for each loop. For each loop, we require repeating element. So what we will do, we will create one request payload where we will pass multiple values, and based on that multiple values, we will return back some values. So here, let me create one request payload. So here I'm just going to create one request payload. For example, here we have some student values. Request payload we have here. You can see. Let me use this one. So here you can see this is the request simple request payload I already created. And in the request payload, if you will see that this is the employee data, and inside the employee data we have multiple employee records. You can see in JSON format, whenever we have to define the array element, we are using the square bracket here. So this is going to define that this is the this is going to be repeating element, that the employee data is going to be repeating element, and what kind of repeating element it will have? It will have that kind of repeating element, right? So here, for example, we will get that kind of values from the request payload, right? We will get these values as a request payload, and in response payload we have to return only one value. In response payload we have to return only one values, and what kind of values we are going to return? For example, here we have here you can see, for example, we have different domain, right? So I want to return back only the domain having the software engineer, having the value is software engineer. So I will take this all the values as a request payload, and the in response payload I want to return back only this value. So let me create one response payload. So here in the response payload I will just copy this one for sample. That kind of values we want to return as a response payload. So how we can do? So let me create one integration where we will map this value as a request payload. So we have already created the integration where we configure the request and the response payload. So I will just make a clone of that one. I will give the name as XX repeating element 01 clone. And here I will remove all these things. Now in the request payload, I will configure. In the request payload, I will change the values here. Okay. And in the response payload, I will change the value. This one. Next, done. Update. So here you can see we have requirement that we have to return back the response that type. This 4 value we have to return back in the response. But if you will see, all these values are coming from the request payload, this one. So this is the first object, this is the second object, this is the third object. For example, we have to add the condition whenever we will get the values, the domain values as software engineer, we have to store this value somewhere else, right? We have to store this value in variable. So that's why at the time we will use global variable of object type. So let me use that one. So let me add one global variable. I will delete this too. Here I will create variable gvar result employee. Gvar I will use the name as employee. And the type what we will select, we will select the type as object, and here once we select the object we have to define the what kind of object we are going to select. So here in the request, in the response payload only, so here you can see the structure for the response we have here, right? So here I will go to the start rate response. Once you will expand in the response wrapper, you can see response data, and in the response data we have all the elements. So I will select the response data. So we are successfully able to create one variable, which variable having all these elements, right? So I will just click here. Now we are able to create the variables. Now we have to iterate the value. We have to iterate the records, right? In this record, we have to add the loop so that we can add the condition to check that domain value is software developer or not. So for iterating the records, we required for each loop, right? So for each loop from wherever we will get, here you can see as we added the while loop, same as we have for each loop. But while loop required condition. While loop required condition when we have to end the while loop. So in for each loop, we required repeating element, so that based on that repeating element data, it can iterate the loop. So here once we drag, it requires to change asking the name. So I want to give the name employee for each. And here we have to create the variable, the loop variable. So every time whenever we will create the variable, we will use the same name employee for each, and now in last we will add a loop var, so that we can easily identify. And here we have to add the repeating element, where we have to map the repeating element so that based on the repeating element only it can iterate. So here you can see in the request wrapper we have the employee data, and this employee data having the multiple values. So here you can see this is the employee data, and this employee data having the multiple values, and this employee data is the array element. That's why you can see the icon we have here. We have the repeating element icon. This is the array icon of the repeating element, so that it can be easily identified that we have the repeating element. And here you can see we created global variable gvar employee, and the type of that variable you can see we selected as object. So you can see what kind of object we selected. We selected object as response of the integration, and in the response of integration we have the this kind of element. You can see here the gvar employee having the data type as object, and what kind of object, the response object, you can see. So we are successfully able to drag the repeating elements. Just click on create. Once you will click on create, it will again add the scope. It will add the loop scope. You can see. So whatever element we will drag or use inside the loop, that will be the repeating element. Right? So here what we have to do, first we have to add the condition. For adding the condition, we have switch statement. So I will drag this switch here. So what condition we want to add? We want to add, so suppose the loop will iterate, and each and every time it will take this element only. The loop variable will having this element only. So we have to add the condition on loop variable with domain name. If domain name is equals to software development, so I will copy this, and here we have to add. So for adding the condition, here we have, once you will edit here, you will see the conditional option. So here what we have to add, we will find the loop variable. So you can see we have the employee underscore for each loop where. So inside the for each loop where, what kind of value we have to compare? We have to compare the domain. So I will drag this domain here. And what kind of value we want to check? We want to check the software engineer. And here we have to provide the name of the expression. So we'll provide the name same as if software engineer developer validate and close. So here you can see we are successfully able to add the condition. So right now we have warning here. We have warning because of we have not added any endpoint here. Right? It's required to provide the any of the endpoint in the if statement or the otherwise statement. Otherwise is simply the else statement. If this condition will not true, control will move this side. So here if the record, whatever record we pass, that record is that software developer, what we need to do? We need to update the global variable here. What we will do? Here you can see for updating the global variable, we require data stitch. So I will drag this data stitch here and give the expression assign update print else underscore stitch is the endpoint name. Configure, and here we have to provide the values. So what values we have to provide? What kind of global variable we have to update? So I will select the global variable here, and what kind of value we want to assign here. Once you will configure, you can see we have the loop variable. So here you can see we have loop variable, and loop variable having the employee data. So I will drag this employee data here. So in the employee data, we have this 5 element, and same as the we have global variable having the 5 element. So you can see the response data is mapped with the employee data. So now we are successfully able to map. Just click here. So there is data mismatch. Okay, let me check why it's showing here. Response and employee data both are same. Data type might be not compatible in any. Let me check.
No, operation object, right?
Yeah, that object we have to select there only on the variable. Drag that one only, right? We added the
Operation is assigned here.
yeah, we are just going to assign value only, right? That's
Okay,
why we
okay.
use assign. So suppose we created the global variable and provided the object as a repeating element, then only we can use the append. So that each and every time whenever we find that kind of values, we can append. So right now we are just taking the example as we have the simple single values for that. So I'm just saying that why it's showing the warning. So here we have the global variable employee type. Once data we map the true value. So let me run the integration and then only we can check that what's the issue. So here we map with the data. In the warning here. Let me create another global variable here. Object. Okay. Okay, now I will explain it here later. So let me first complete here. So here what we have done, we added the condition if the data, whatever data we are iterating over the records, the request wrapper, if the data having the domain as software engineer, the same values having we have in the loop variable. So we map with the global variable we created. And later on, once this loop will ended in the true else otherwise condition, I don't want to add anything. Once the loop completed, I want to map this global variable in the response only. So here in the response wrapper, in response wrapper we are getting error. We are getting error because of, if you remember, the previously we have different response wrapper, response payload. But as we make a clone of that previous integration and we updated the response structure, that's why it's showing error here. So what we need to do for removing that error, we have to delete the all the target node. You can see the status N19 and the result is not available right now. That's why it's showing error. So here what we will click on that delete target node. So all these things will be deleted. Now here you can see in the response data, we have all this element and all this element we are getting from the global variable we created. So this is not the gvar employee. This is wrong one. So we use the gvar employee 2 only. So we will drag this here. So here we have name. So I will map this name with name, DOB with DOB, domain with domain, contact with contact, and address with address. Right now we are not mapping this employee data node with this the response data because we don't have the array element right now. That's why we didn't map. So just click on the validate and close. Again we have error here. It's error related to the tracing variable only. We already know that whenever we are updating the endpoint, the trigger endpoint, every time we have to update the tracing variable. So the tracing variable we updated earlier, each and every time whenever we will update, that variable will be lost. So I will just provide the name here, save, close, and close. Now we have to activate this integration. Wait, body, we have some values, same values I don't want to change, and done. Here you can see once we are done, we are getting the response. In the response, we are getting the values. We are getting the values only for the software developer. As we added the condition and based on that condition, we created global variable. That global variable having the node, that one, and the same we mapped, and in response we map the global variable. So let me explain that was the issue that we are facing while creating the global variable. So if you remember, while creating the global variable, we select the invalid structure. That's why at the time of mapping the loop variable, we are facing that issue. So here you can see previously we created global variable, but in the global variable response data type object, we selected object, and what kind of object we selected here in the gvar one, we selected object as the response, but we are trying to map the value with the the loop object. Loop object, it means the request payload object. That's why at the time mapping here it was not allowing us, because we are selecting two different object. The first different object while creating the global variable, different object while assigning the value. That was the error we are facing. So here we learned that how we can iterate the loop from the repeating element. So we pass multiple values as a repeating element to the integration. We added the logic, we added the condition. Based on the specific condition, we are getting the records, and the same records we store in global variable and we return back as a response. So here sometimes we require that whatever data we are getting, we have to generate the file based on that data, right? So suppose we are getting the request payload, this one, and based on this request payload, we have to create a file, and that file need to be shared over the server or placed over the email and all. So instead of, for the testing purpose right now, we are passing this data as a request payload. There can be the requirement that data we can get from the report call, or the data we can get from the ATP database table, that kind of things. So how we can generate the file based on the data? So we will learn here. For generating the file, we have facilities of stage file activity. With the help of stage file activity, we can create the file in Oracle integration, and that file then we can share anywhere, like our email or placing file over the server and all. So for creating the file, we required file structure. What kind of file structure is there? So right now it's in JSON structure. So as we are going to create CSV file, what we will do, we will create one CSV sample file. Then we will use that CSV sample file while creating the file. So let me first create one sample file. So here what we are going to do is that we are going to create one sample file. That sample file will having the values. So what kind of values that file will have? That file will have all these details. So let me use this name here. The first column will be name. Second column will be DOB. The third column will be domain. The fourth column will be contact, and fifth column will be address. And after that, I want to add few more column. The few more column that created by will be the one who run the integration and the creation date. And I want to give the instance ID, that for which integration instance that file is generated, right? So I will use instance ID. So I want to create CSV file in such a way that CSV file will contain that kind of data. So for here, for providing the data, we require one sample value. So I will copy anything like name. So let me suppose copy these values only as a sample record, so that we can use the same sample file while creating the file with the help of a stage operation. Domain, contact, anything, address, anything created by this one, this one. Now I'm going to save this file as a CSV. Desktop OIC file. So here, so I will move to the desktop. We have OIC content. Here we will create one folder. By CSV, and we'll select type as CSV and save. Save. So we are successfully able to create simple CSV file. Based on the same CSV file, we are going to create the file. So let me move to the integration part. So here we have to create the integration. Just give me 1 minute. So first we need to create the integration. Let me add that one. So right now we are getting instance issue. So again, I will just open new instance of the integration. Save it. So here, as we are passing this value, we are going to pass this value as a request payload. So we will create again app-driven integration. And in the app-driven integration, we will configure the request and response payload. So here, let's file is on. And we have to add the request payload. We will drag the REST endpoint. Dot REST next. In the request payload, we are going to pass this value. So I will just choose here. Okay. Next, in the response payload, just we are going to return back the file name. Like we are going to return back the file name and the status. Status as success or error, or like we uploaded the file over email or not. That kind of things we are going to use. So here done. Click on OK. Done. So we are successfully able to add the endpoint so that we can configure the request and the response payload. And now whatever data we receive, based on that data, we have to create the file. So for creating the file, we have a stage file activity, and that stage file activity having the option to create the file. So whenever we are saying that we are going to create the file, it means we are going to write the file in OIC. So here I will provide the name as we are going to select the operation as write. So I will use write stage and next. And here you can see we have different options. We have, you can see we have read option. We are going to create the file. So I will choose the option as write file. Whenever we will use write file operation, we have to specify the file name and the directory where we want to write the file, where we want to create the file. So here this is the name of the file which we want to give. So suppose we want to create the file with the name. Here I will use concat with the name as employee file underscore, and after we want to add the instance ID. So again here we will concrete the instance ID here. In the metadata runtime, we have instance ID. And while giving the file name, it's required to pass the extension of the file. So here I will pass the extension as .csv. So we are successfully able to define the file name. So the file name will be something like that, employee file underscore instance ID .csv. And now here we have to provide the directory where we have to write the file. So remember, a stage file operation is only going to work in Oracle integration only, not our server or somewhere else. The file path or directory we are going to provide, the directory is the OIC virtual directory. Once this integration will be completed, the directory will be vanished, the directory will be removed. We cannot access this directory over server or somewhere else. The directory is only inside this scope of the integration, or we can say the temporary directory. That's why most of the time we are using temp. So this is the name. So what it will do, it will first check that in OIC virtual directory for this specific integration, do we have directory with the name of temp? If yes, then that specific file will be created inside the directory. If not, it will create a new temp directory with the name of temp, and it will place the file, this file inside this temp directory. Here we have append to existing file option. We will learn in later. Whenever we require to add data into the existing file, we use this operation. So we will discuss it later. Now here we have to select the schema. So as we are going to create CSV file, we have to provide CSV schema. Even we can provide XML schema to generate the CSV file also. But yes, as simple, we are going to use CSV only, so that whenever we want to create file, CSV file and all, we can provide the simple structure from there only. It will be really bit difficult to generate XML schema or the JSON schema. That's why we use simply CSV schema. So next, here we have to upload the schema file, upload the sample file. So we are already created the sample file. I will select the sample file from here only. So here we have OIC session. Inside that we have employee sample. So I will select here. So whatever column we have in the employee sample file, you can see all the columns we have available here. Name, DOB, domain, address, and later on in last you can see here we have all the columns, that the instance ID and all. And for all the columns, it's by default adding the data type as a string or based on the value we provided. Even you can change the data type here by string to number and all, or you can let it be the same. Whatever value we are getting, we are going to map. That kind of things we can do. And here you can see we have one option that mark all as optional. So it is mandatory to have a minimum one column to a value. That's why the any of the column we are going to make as mandatory. So suppose here once we will click here, all the column will be optional. And once we will try to save, it will generate an error because it's required or it's mandatory to have a minimum one column as a mandatory column here. So here I will what I will do, I know that the name value we are going to get always name value, so I will select the name as mandatory. And here you can see we have some values. Here we have to provide the record name and the record set name. The record set name is the array element, and this is the record name is the specific element inside the array. For example, here you can see we have the multiple element. So this is the record set and this is the record of the record set. So that kind of things we have to provide here. Here in the record set name, this is the name it's mandatory to provide. So that based on the name, it can generate the endpoint. So I will give the name as R and RS for record set. As we uploaded CSV file, that's why delimited you can see as a comma separated and the character set and the optionally enclosed by double quotes. Even if there can be situations, sometimes we need to upload the pipe separated file and all, so we can use here. Go next and done. As we created the we added the state file operation while write, and we provided the file structure. We have to provide the mapping for the data. So you can see this is the mapper of map to write state. Once you will click here, you will get all the endpoints here we added. You can see this is the record set. Inside the record we have records for records. You can see this is the array element. It means that that can have the multiple records. And if you will move the request payload, in the request payload also you can get the repeating element. What we will do, we will map this repeating element here with the repeating element. Now the general variable, the single node with the single node, domain, domain with domain, and contact with contact, and address with address. So now we mapped here, we have remained three columns. The created by we can directly map from the integration metadata. And here is invoked by is the created by. And you can see creation date, we can directly use the current date. So we have here, we have functions, exciting functions, that current date. You can see current date time we can use here. So I will use current date time as a current date. And instance ID, again, we can get the runtime metadata. So we are mapped with all these values. So based on that value, our data file will be created, and data file will be created in the virtual directory of Oracle integration only. And now in the response of this one, we will receive file reference. File reference, it means the pointer of the file. File reference is, it means the file, right? So what we have to do is that we have to send this file over email. For sending the file over email, we require the notification. So I will add this notification here. You can ping your email ID in the chat, in the Zoom chat only, so that I can add your email ID here. So here I'm just going to add the notification. So employee data notification, click on create. Here we have to provide the from where this email will trigger. So this email will trigger from no reply at oracle.com. And here too, for which person we have to send an email. So I want to send an email to myself. And thus, anyone have provided the email? Oh, stop.
Yes. So now here we will validate. So now we done with the two email. Now subject, here I will give the name as, in subject I want to give the name as integration name. Integration name again we will get from metadata. Here in the integration we have add name. I will drag this name here, and then we will use message as Wi-Fi. Validate. We have error. Let me check what kind of error. Yes, single quotes we provided here. We added the subject as a integration name and then employee file. And here we have to acquire the message. Hi, please find file employee. And here you can see when we have to add the attachment. So we have attachment option here. Once you will click on plus icon, you will get option to map the file reference. Remember, we have to map the file reference, not file data. So file reference from where we will get the response from the write stage operation. So here you can see we have the write stage. This is the request. So we have not to go for request. We have to move for the response. So here you can see write stage in the response, write a response. Once you will expand here, again we are getting that error. So what we will do, we will close and again we will edit here. And the response, once we will expand, you can see ICS file. Inside the ICS file, we have the file reference, you can see. So this file reference I will map here. It means that this is the file we want to send over email. So we added the file reference. Even you can pass the file name here only. So let me provide the file name here. For providing the file name, we require the file name from the endpoint, and in the message body we cannot get the file name. So I will create one parameters, underscore file name, and here we will map the values, and values again we will get from the response. And here inside the ICS file we have properties. Inside the properties we have the file name. You can see this is the file name. I will drag here, close. And now here I will use the file name, and here we will provide this variable. Now validate and close. Here we have to provide the mapping to the response of this integration. So again in the response, I will provide the status as success. And here in the file name pattern, so the file name we will get from the write response only. Even we can get the same from the request also, as we provided the file name. So no, we don't have here. Yes, in the response only, we will move to the same. And in the properties, we have the file name. So I will map this file name here so that the integration response can send the file name. So here we map successfully, close. Here we have to add the identifier. So in the identifier, let me add the name only. And save, close. Activate. So now you can see we are successfully able to complete the integration. Now it's time to run. So here we are going to run the integration. In body, we have to provide the details. So here, as we have 3 records, let me add one more record. And in the record, suppose address I am just going to use Kolkata I-26, associate consultant, senior consultant name, and here the contact number I want to provide as 4. So now this value I want to send to the integration so that integration can generate the file and send the file over email. Just click on the test, and you can see once integration completed, it returning back the file name. So in the file name, we concatenated the instance ID. You can see this is the same instance ID 27. And here we got the status. And if you will see, Pravat, can you check the email? So after completion of the error, we will get the email.